The clink of silverware and the low murmur of expensive conversations filled the dining room of Lou Rivage, but all I could hear was the silence between my father and me. 10 years. 10 years since we'd last sat across from each other. 10 years since the night he told me I was no longer his daughter. Now, here he was, sliding a folder across the white linen tablecloth with hands that trembled just enough to betray his desperation. "We need you to come back," he said, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. Not commanding. Not firm. Just tired. I didn't touch the folder. I reached for my water instead, letting the coolness of the glass ground me. I took a slow sip as my mind drifted, not to the company, not to the numbers, but to the last time we stood face to face. The library at the estate. The fire casting shadows against the shelves of first editions. His words sharp as broken glass, "He's using you to get to our money. No daughter of mine will marry someone so beneath us." I had made my choice that night. Marco or the Montgomery legacy. I chose love. I chose dignity. I chose myself. At 25, I walked out of that house with no inheritance, no trust fund, no job. Only a packed suitcase, a new last name, and the man who looked at me like I was already enough. Now, a decade later, I was sitting in a designer suit bought with money I earned myself, in a restaurant that once refused my wedding reservation because my father's name had pulled too many strings in the opposite direction. "I'm sure you've heard," he continued. "Montgomery Media is in trouble. The board is prepared to offer you the CEO position. Full control. We believe you're the only one who can turn this around." I let the silence stretch, forcing him to sit in it. He hadn't said my name yet. Not once. "When was the last time you checked a news alert that wasn't about your stock price?" I asked, folding my hands on the table. He blinked. "We won the Clio Award last year," I continued. "Phoenix Digital landed 5 of your former clients in under 6 months. I was on the cover of Business Insider last quarter. You missed a lot, Charles." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said, finally opening the folder. "What wasn't fair was being discarded because I married someone you couldn't brag about at the club. The reports were worse than I imagined: client attrition, outdated infrastructure, red ink everywhere. My brothers had clearly coasted on the Montgomery name, assuming it would always be enough. But legacy without leadership is just arrogance. And I didn't come from nothing. I came from exile. And exile had taught me how to build." I flipped through the folder slowly, page by page, while my father sat in stiff silence across from me. His cufflinks, Montgomery engraved, of course, caught the light, but they didn't carry the same weight they once did. Titles, heirlooms, family crests, none of it mattered anymore. Not when the empire they were meant to protect was crumbling from within. "Your brothers have been in over their heads for years," he said eventually, as if offering justification instead of confession. "Thomas is back in rehab. Richard's divorce settlement gutted his stock. They're not built for crisis." "And I am?" I asked, glancing up. "The daughter you cast out because I refused to marry someone with a trust fund?" His mouth opened, then closed. He didn't answer. I looked back down at the numbers: marketing budgets that hadn't shifted in half a decade, digital infrastructure that still listed flash-based media assets, client retention metrics in freefall. I saw a company clinging to a name and a past, drowning in its own pride. "I warned you about this," I said. 10 years ago. I told you that digital wasn't a trend, it was a transformation. But you were too busy grooming your sons to notice that the world was moving without you." He didn't argue. "Where's Mom?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "She sent something." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. I knew what it was before he opened it. My grandmother's emerald ring. The one my mother used to let me try on when I was 6, whispering, "Someday, this will be yours." That promise vanished the night I chose Marco. She never spoke up. Never defended me. She just looked away. I stared at the ring nestled in velvet. She said you should have it now, he added quietly. I closed the box. You haven't met your grandchildren, I said, watching his expression shift. Sophia and Miguel. They're 7. Bright. Curious. They ask why they don't have a grandfather like their friends. I never had a good answer. His lips parted slightly. I didn't know. No, I said. You didn't try to know. I stood, smoothing the front of my suit, placing the folder neatly on the table. I'll have my team review the documents, I said. And if there's a path to salvage what's left, I'll make you a proposal. But make no mistake, this won't be a homecoming. It will be an acquisition. Phoenix Digital will hold majority interest. I will restructure every part of this business as I see fit. That's not what the board expected, he said sharply. I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. They expected me to be grateful for being needed. I'm not. He blinked. I built something out of the ashes you left me in, I continued. I don't need your empire. But I'll buy it, because you no longer deserve to lead it. Then I turned and walked out, leaving the velvet box on the table. Let him sit with legacy. I was working with the future. The elevator ride down from the restaurant was quiet, except for the soft click of my heels on the marble floor and the faint hum of jazz in the background. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the Manhattan breeze greeted me like an old friend, cool, honest, indifferent. The same city that had once swallowed me whole when I had nothing now watched me pass with its quiet, knowing gaze. Marco was waiting across the street. He leaned against our car with that easy confidence he's always had, his sleeves rolled up, his hands tucked into his pockets. 10 years and he still looked at me like I was the whole skyline. As I approached, he opened the passenger door with a smile that didn't ask any questions, just offered warmth. Well, he asked once we were inside. They're desperate, I said, buckling in. The numbers are worse than I expected. Their infrastructure is a relic. They've been hemorrhaging clients for years and refused to evolve. And now they want you to fix it? They want me to save it, I corrected. But they still think they get to keep ownership. Marco let out a soft laugh. Of course they do. I turned to him. They think I'll do it for redemption. For a seat at the table I was kicked out of. Will you? I paused. Then shook my head. No. I'll do it for leverage. For legacy, on my terms. They don't get to ask for loyalty after they burned every bridge. He nodded, his eyes steady on the road ahead. Then let's start writing your terms. The next morning, I called a meeting with my executive team at Phoenix Digital. We sat in our glass-walled conference room, 10 stories above the street, bathed in light, surrounded by the hum of a company built on vision and grit. I laid the Montgomery folder on the table and looked at the people who had helped me build everything from the ground up. They want us to save them, I said. So we're going to buy them. I delegated due diligence to Aisha, my lead analyst, sharp as a blade, never missed a discrepancy. James, my CTO, began reviewing their digital systems for security gaps and scalability. Marco, my partner in every way, would handle internal brand realignment. Within 72 hours, we had a full diagnostic. Montgomery Media wasn't just outdated, it was broken at the root. Nepotism, bloated salaries, archaic workflows. Their brand equity was strong, but it was all image, no substance. The kind of company that spent $250,000 on gala sponsorships but used outdated analytics platforms. We prepared our proposal. A full buyout of controlling interest at a value indexed to their current market cap, reduced due to instability and reputational risk. In exchange, Phoenix Digital would assume operational leadership and begin restructuring immediately. All current C-suite executives, except a few key veterans, would be replaced. The proposal was clean. Direct. Uncompromising. Exactly like the daughter they tried to forget. And when I pressed send, I felt nothing but focus. I didn't want their approval. I wanted results. Because this wasn't about rejoining the Montgomery name. This was about proving that I never needed it to begin with. The board meeting was held at Montgomery Media's headquarters, a limestone monolith perched at the edge of Midtown, polished to a shine but crumbling from within. I hadn't set foot in that building since I was 25, walking out with my badge deactivated and my title erased overnight. No goodbye. No meeting. Just exile with a smile. Now I was walking back in, not through the side entrance like I used to, not with an assistant or a name tag. This time, the receptionist stood up when she saw me. "Ms. Ramirez," she said with a nod. "They're expecting you." Funny. 10 years ago, they never thought they'd have to say my name again. Inside the boardroom, 12 people sat in stiff leather chairs around a massive walnut table. Most of them were men. All of them were older. And every single one had, at some point in the past decade, either ignored me, dismissed me, or actively participated in my erasure. Charles Montgomery sat at the head of the table. He did not introduce me. I didn't wait for permission. "Before we begin," I said calmly, placing a thick folder at the center of the table, "you should know that this is not a negotiation. It's an acquisition proposal. Phoenix Digital will assume controlling interest of Montgomery Media, implement immediate restructuring, and report directly to me." There was a pause. The kind that tightens jaws and widens eyes. One board member, a man with a deep tan and a tie too loud for the room, cleared his throat. "This isn't the kind of collaboration we envisioned when Charles reached out to you." I met his gaze. "You didn't envision anything because you didn't expect to be in this position. But you are. Your company is bleeding. Your clients are gone. Your leadership is compromised. You don't need collaboration. You need a rescue." Another voice, a woman this time, CFO I remembered vaguely from my early years, asked, "And what do you gain from this, Ms. Ramirez?" "My legacy," I said without hesitation. "And a public example of what happens when someone you underestimate becomes the person holding your lifeline." My father's voice cut in then, lower, less sure than usual. "The family brand was never meant to be diluted." "Then it shouldn't have been handed to people who diluted it through incompetence," I replied, sharper now. "This isn't personal, Charles. It's business. The difference is, I know how to separate the two. You never could." The room shifted. Uneasy. But listening. I laid out the full plan: digital reinvention, staff realignment, client reclamation strategy, tech stack overhaul. I named names. I named mistakes. I didn't gloat. I simply showed them what survival looked like, and what it would cost them. Silence followed. Until finally, someone asked, "What do you want in return?" I looked around the room, making eye contact with every person who once watched me disappear without a word. "Everything," I said. "And I'm offering you the privilege of still being in the room when it works." The vote passed 2 days later. 9-3. Montgomery Media became a Phoenix Digital subsidiary. And for the first time in its history, the company was led by a woman with no inheritance, no handouts, only results. Not Montgomery's daughter. Just Olivia. Exactly as I wanted. The transition began immediately. I took the corner office my brothers once fought over and replaced the oversized mahogany desk with a sleek, standing one. The oil painting of my grandfather was taken down, stored, not discarded, and in its place, I hung a single-framed photo of our first client pitch deck from the early Phoenix Digital days. It still had coffee stains and my handwritten margin notes from our old apartment kitchen table. I didn't need the space to remind me where I came from. Everyone else needed that reminder. The first month was brutal. Legacy staff resisted every change. Department heads who hadn't learned a new platform in 5 years balked when I brought in our lead UX strategist to overhaul the company's digital presence. I replaced 2 VPs in the first week. A third resigned before I could fire him. People started calling me ruthless. They said it like it was an insult. I wore it like a badge. Meanwhile, my team from Phoenix moved in like oxygen into a vacuum. Young, sharp, fearless. They didn't ask for permission, they solved problems before anyone even knew there was a fire. Our momentum was undeniable. Former clients began calling us again. A Fortune 100 brand that had ghosted Montgomery for 2 years signed a 6-month contract after seeing the first preview of our campaign pitch. Behind the scenes, I could feel my father watching. Not interfering. Just circling. Like a ghost unsure whether it was haunting or observing. One afternoon, he stopped by my office unannounced. "I barely recognize the place," he said, glancing around the minimal, sunlit space. "That's the point," I replied, not looking up from my screen. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Your mother, she's been asking if she can come to dinner." I paused, fingers still on the keyboard. Then I looked at him. "We'll be grilling in the backyard this weekend," I said. "She can come. If she brings dessert." Miguel loves anything chocolate. His eyes flickered. "Thank you." I nodded. "Don't thank me. Show up." That weekend, they did. My mother brought brownies and fresh-cut flowers. She looked older than I remembered, a little thinner, more hesitant. But when Sophia took her hand and led her to the garden without flinching, something in her shoulders relaxed. Marco manned the grill like he always did, calm, capable, saying just enough but never more. My father sat beside him with a beer and didn't speak much. But he stayed. And that, for now, was enough. Later that night, when the twins were asleep and the house had gone quiet, Marco found me out on the porch, a blanket around my shoulders and a glass of wine in my hand. "You okay?" he asked, easing beside me. I thought for a moment. "I think I am," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not proving anything. I'm just leading." He wrapped his arm around me, kissed the top of my head. "You always were. They're just finally seeing it." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because leadership isn't about being seen. It's about walking into the fire no one else wants to touch, and building something new in the ashes. And I had. 3 months into the acquisition, Montgomery Media didn't just look different, it was different. We rebranded the company's digital presence, rebuilt the back end of every client account, and implemented performance metrics that had never existed under my brother's leadership. We launched 2 new verticals targeting Gen Z markets, brought on 4 major clients, and cut legacy bloat by nearly 40%. The industry noticed. Forbes ran a feature, "The Exiled Daughter Who Resurrected a Dying Empire." Adage called the turnaround the cleanest coup in modern agency history. And the calls kept coming. Former competitors now asked about partnerships. Panels invited me to speak on modern succession, though they had no idea how ironic that term felt in my case. At the quarterly board meeting, I walked into the room knowing I was finally seeing me not as the fallback, not as the rebel, not even as the daughter, but as the architect of their survival. The presentation was crisp, 32 slides. Strategy, data, results. I stood in front of the same walnut table where I once fetched coffee for men who never learned my name. Now I was the one holding the laser pointer, the room silent except for the sound of my voice. Halfway through, I caught a glimpse of my parents seated near the front. My mother clutched the dinner invitation I had sent her 2 weeks prior, the one with hand-drawn hearts from Sophia and Miguel tucked inside. She looked at me like she hadn't quite figured out how to reconcile the girl she lost with the woman she was watching command the room. And my father, his face was unreadable. Not disapproving, but not proud either. Something more complex. Like a man who knew he had pushed away his greatest asset, only to buy her back at 10 times the cost. When I finished, I didn't wait for applause. "This isn't a recovery," I said calmly. "It's a reinvention. And it only works if every person in this room lets go of what this company used to be. Nostalgia is not a strategy. It's dead weight. And I don't carry dead weight." Silence. Then the board chair, one of the only people who had actually voted for me during the acquisition, leaned forward. "We're with you, Ms. Ramirez," he said. "Lead the way." And I did. Not with anger. Not with ego. With clarity. After the meeting, as the board members trickled out, my father approached me. "You were extraordinary," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always been," I replied. "You just weren't looking." He opened his mouth, as if to argue or maybe apologize, but I held up a hand. "You don't need to say it," I said. "Not anymore. This isn't about closure. It's about evolution." Then I turned to leave, passing through the doors of the boardroom for the first time as the woman who owned it. And in the glass reflection, I saw my past walking behind me. But I didn't look back. I never do. 6 months after the acquisition, Montgomery Media had its most profitable quarter in 5 years. The headlines shifted, from scandal and collapse to resurgence and innovation. Investors stopped asking about my brothers and started asking about our next move. Clients who once ghosted now lined up for meetings. My leadership wasn't questioned anymore. It was quoted. But success didn't change me. It clarified me. At home, life was quieter. Real. Marco still left handwritten notes in my bag before client meetings. The twins still argued over whose turn it was to walk the dog. We still made pancakes on Sundays and let the syrup spill where it wanted. Our life wasn't curated for optics. It was lived, honestly. Fully. One evening, I found myself standing alone in the foyer of my childhood home. We were hosting a formal dinner, my idea. The first time in a decade the Montgomery estate would hold a gathering in my name. The room still smelled like old wood polish and pride, but I wasn't the girl who used to shrink beneath its ceilings. My mother stood in the doorway, watching me. "You look like your grandmother," she said softly. "She ran this house without apology too." I turned to her. "She didn't have to fight for her place here." "No," she said. "But you did. And you earned more than a place. You earned the foundation." The dinner was elegant and unremarkable in many ways. Guests smiled. Toasts were made. Photos were taken. But when my father raised his glass to our daughter Olivia, who brought us back from the edge, I didn't flinch. I simply nodded. After dessert, I stepped outside into the garden. The same one I used to sneak into as a teenager to escape expectations I hadn't agreed to. The air smelled like jasmine and rain. Marco joined me a few moments later, his tie loosened, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You didn't just save them," he said. "You transformed them." I shook my head. "I didn't do it for them." "I know," he said. "You did it because you could." That night, as we drove back to the city, Sophia fell asleep against my shoulder, Miguel humming a song under his breath. Marco's hand rested lightly on the gearshift between us, warm and familiar. I looked out at the city skyline, alive, stubborn, radiant. They had disinherited me. But I had never stopped building. And now, the very legacy they tried to withhold was thriving in my hands. Because family may turn its back. But purpose? Purpose waits patiently for you to arrive. And I had. And that's how I learned that real power doesn't come from being invited back. It comes from walking back in, on your own terms. Have you ever been underestimated, only to rise above? Tell me your story below. Tap like if this hit deep. Subscribe for more real revenge stories. Share this with someone who's rewriting their legacy.